Hi, everyone. Welcome to Early Access. Today, I'm chatting with Charlie Liao, the first business operations hire at Column, a company rebuilding core banking infrastructure from the ground up. Column was founded by William Hockey, who previously co-founded Plaid. Unlike most fintechs that depend on sponsor banks or middleware, Column is a nationally chartered bank and provides advanced payment rails and banking services to help any company move, hold, or lend USD at scale. Charlie joined almost exactly a year ago, happy 1 year, when Column was around 70 employees. As the first BizOps hire reporting directly to the CEO, he's helped define what BizOps mean at a company that's technical and fast moving. I've known Charlie since I moved to SF, so I'm very excited about this conversation. We'll talk about how he decided to make the jump from fintech investing to operating, what it's like to build structure in ambiguity, and his advice for both founders hiring their first BizOps person and operators stepping into that seat. So, Charlie, welcome to the pod.
Thanks for having me. Been looking forward to it.
So, maybe let's start from pre-column. You started your career on the investing side. What drew you to switch from evaluating companies to joining one?
Yes. So a few things. I way back in the day, I'd started this shitty startup in undergrad. I'm allowed to swear. Should I stop
Yeah,
swearing?
yeah,
Okay, okay. I started a really shitty startup in undergrad, and even though it didn't go anywhere, what it imparted on me was how exciting the energy was to build something. The community I was embedded in was infectious. It was awesome just being part of the ecosystem. And there was just this like hustler and get shit done mentality that really resonated with me back then. You could really just do whatever you wanted. Like we would for this startup, like we would host dinner events at people's homes, and it was like
yeah.
a early Airbnb experiences prototype, and you could just do that and like harass people on the street to do this for you. It was a very cool time. And so all the careers after that, I held in consulting, a quant fund, and then venture investing. I felt like there was just a lot more red tape, optics, and politics getting in the way of getting things done. And so, in my mind, going to a place like Column was a way to get rid of a lot of that red tape and get back to being super execution oriented, which gives me a lot of excitement. And then the second thing I would say is my role at Acrew as an investor was really focused on a lot of thesis work. And it was exciting because I got to get super deep on a lot of areas and become a pseudo expert in all things fintech. But there were a lot of times where I was doing thesis work where I felt like I never really fully gotten to the truth because a lot of things in financial services are quite esoteric. And so you can't really know what's going on under the hood unless you're actually doing it yourself. And for me, I get a lot of intellectual satisfaction for getting to the ground truth of why something works in the way that it does. And so joining a place like Column was a good way to do that.
Yeah, awesome. And so, how did Column first get on your radar?
Yeah, so maybe a couple weeks after a bunch of the partner banks in fintech were getting consent orders from the government, in other words, regulatory action telling them to stop what they're doing, every one of our portfolio companies started asking us about our thoughts on Column, and that's when I realized Column was starting to do something pretty interesting.
Interesting. I didn't know that. And at a high level, what was the process of getting to know Column and the interview process there?
Yeah. So when I started hearing about Column, I got kind of lucky because there was a friend I'd met in San Francisco who had been working at Columns in 2022. So it was as easy as me just shooting him a text and asking what's going on here. I'm interested in this BizOps role. And getting to know them was pretty straightforward. My first conversation was with a couple of the execs, and I talked to William, then did a case and came on site. So it was a pretty standard BizOps interview, I think.
Yeah, awesome. And then once you got the offer, how did you decide whether or not to join?
Yeah, so three things. The first and probably the most important was just meeting William and our other leadership. I was pretty blown away the entire time with how visionary and intelligent not only William was, but also the rest of the executive team. But everyone was also really grounded, right? I think people were really straightforward. Their mentality was to quietly build something big and not get caught up in a lot of the Silicon Valley status games that you find some pretty successful teams to be doing. And that attracted me a lot. I think it resonated with my core values. I think it made me excited about what it would be like to work with a 10x founding team. Like if I was investing, this would be if I could do one deal a decade, like it would have been with Column, which is what I thought at the time.
Mm.
Secondly, I think when I dug more into the tech stack itself, Column built its own core, and so the first thing I asked myself is like, what kind of psycho does that? No one builds their own core. It's a really difficult process. A bajillion edge cases you have to account for. It's a very tough system to build, and that's why like no one does it. And that's why a lot of these legacy banks never migrate to these next gen cores that keep coming up every now and then. And so in my mind, it looked like a real technology differentiator that a lot of other fintechs just don't really have. And so that attracted me a lot. And then finally, I would say the long-term vision for Column is pretty compelling. Partner banking is our bread and butter. We do a lot of it. We do it well. But William's vision for the business is to make this an N of one asset that extends far beyond partner banking. We have our national banking charter. We have an incredible tech stack, so we can go after a lot of pretty interesting opportunities in financial services that a lot of people can't.
Yeah, super exciting. And yeah, I think the bar of meeting the one investment in a decade is pretty high, especially for full-time venture investors. So that's very high praise for Column. And then making the shift from investor to first function operator. Obviously, it's not like Column was a seed stage company, but still you were the first business operations hire. And so how did you think about risk or just kind of wrap your head around that move?
Yeah, it's funny talking about risk in this case because I actually felt like, and this is, I don't know, this might be a hot take, but I felt like I was de-risking my career in a lot of ways by jumping from VC to operating. I think the one thing that I was getting really caught up on when I was an investor is how the market structure of VC was changing and how competitive it was, especially because my fund was doing seed and Series A, and Series A was becoming increasingly harder as every larger fund was preempting every round and their mother's round.
Yeah.
And so for me, I was like, I felt like I was in a casino where some people had way more information than I did. And so I wanted to find a job outside the casino. And so in some ways, I felt like I was de-risking.
Mm.
The other risk I thought about was startup risk, obviously. I just felt like from a stage perspective, seed and Series A, the risk and reward for being an early employee just wasn't there for me. Like working 100 hours a week, right, for 1% just doesn't really make sense, right? At that point, you might as well just start something of your own. And so for me, it was like, well, let's just find a growth stage company, product market fit, really good team, so I could have a little bit more structure in what I'd be working on and also more structure in what I'd be learning.
Yeah, makes sense. And now that it's been a year, what was the hardest thing about the transition that you maybe didn't expect?
Yeah, I think one of them probably relates to what I was doing in the prior role. I think it takes a lot of energy now to think about what's happening big picture in the market. I think it's really important to take into context what's happening in the market and fintech and beyond that and how it relates to Column. And I think as an investor, that's you live and breathe that. And so now I think to keep up with the ecosystem, like where funds are flowing, like what trends are interesting, how fintechs are thinking about infrastructure in general. I think it takes a lot more active energy to get that kind of intel.
Mm.
And then the second thing that I didn't fully appreciate until maybe 6 months ago is that I am just saddled with a different kind of stress. I think now that I'm in a role where I'm a team of one currently, I'm fully accountable for what I do, the projects that I work on, the processes that I stand up. And so it's all attributable to me. And it's kind of a never ending marathon. And so it's like a more low grade, but also in some ways intense version of stress, which I think motivates me to do a really good job here, but at the same time was just a bit of an adjustment.
Yeah, I feel like the joke with friends is like venture is anxiety and then startup is stress. So just choose
Yeah,
your preferred preferred
yeah,
feeling.
exactly.
Okay, so going to kind of day one or month one of Column. So when you joined, BizOps didn't really exist yet. How did you define what success should look like or think about what priorities to take on first?
Yeah, I'm still thinking about that. What I'll start by saying is I think having a BizOps team is a symptom of something going right in a business. Either you're bringing a bunch of new customers on, you're making a lot of money, or you're scaling the team quickly. The business in general is becoming more complex. And the Column BizOps team, we spend a lot of time building in durable processes for core parts of the business, do a lot of workflow automation for different team members. We also support building product, GM new business units. And so success will mean a lot of different things to different BizOps team members as we build a team, depending on what they're working on. So I'll try to think about maybe some like measures of success that endure across all of the different activities that we have. I think first and foremost, success looks like becoming an expert at the bank in your first 6 months. Because we're a bank, we grow with a really unique set of challenges that between Eng, go to market, legal risk, and compliance, I think there's a lot more sensitivity and interplay between all those different teams than a lot of other traditional startups, so to speak. You have to build a lot of credibility across all those teams because every process that you set up, product that you touch, there are serious implications for everyone, especially on the legal risk and compliance side. And so, first and foremost, to be successful in the role, you have to be able to hold the business in the palm of your hand in a lot of ways. The second is after you've ramped, I think success looks like the longevity of the new processes or workflows or business units that you're standing up. I would say traditional banking has not scaled very well. Headcount in traditional banking grows very linearly. So every time I think about setting up a process at Column, the number one thing I think about is like, how does this process endure without having to hire more human input to make the process work? And so, like, right now, I'm still very early in the role, but if I look at the processes I've stood up, my metric for success is it still running? How long does it take before that process needs a person to continue supporting it at the next phase of scale? And if that's happening a lot, then I'm doing a really bad job.
That's a good metric. What was the first or second project that you worked on that was ambiguous, and how did you approach figuring it out?
Yeah. So it's actually there's one that I'm working on right now where we're rolling out a new API. I can't say too much about it, but it is this new API that every one of our fintech partners is going to have to use. And it's a very cross-functional project because it's an API that touches a combination of onboarding end customers. There's a lot of legal risk and compliance implications. It'll very much change the way we think about risk at Column. And so I was brought in to bring order around this particular project because it had a bit of a longer timeline. So it was hard for people to like quickly execute on it today. And so what this project ended up being is helping spec out the API, write the documentation for it, and then roll it out to our customer base. And so what I'm doing right now that I've spec'd out the API, is just like defining what rollout looks like. I think the nice part about not having any sort of playbook for this kind of stuff is that you can just do things that are really intuitive. And so a lot of my work here has been just like sitting at my desk and thinking about step by step, like I'm building a Lego set together, like what are the outcomes that I want and how do I achieve those outcomes?
To that point, what's the relationship between BizOps and product and engineering? I think it's probably one of the more cross-functional roles in the business. And so how do you navigate that relationship and where you sit?
Yeah. And so we don't have a product team. So a lot of the times when I'm plugging in with engineering, I'm usually standing in doing something a product manager would do. So in the case of this API that I'm working on, the API spec was like largely defined, but I had to go back and like revalidate a lot of the requirements and add a bunch to the spec. And so like a lot of my interactions with engineering are purely as the product stand-in for the few times I do product work. And then I also spend a lot of time because it's a BizOps role, like documenting stuff and creating process for stuff. And a lot of that's going to touch the eng team. And so a lot of it's also just making sure what I'm coming up with isn't impeding on the way that they think a product should work or the way that they think a certain like new feature should be rolled out.
On the topic of documentation and processes, are there any frameworks or rituals that you've introduced that have really stuck or that you're really glad that you put in place?
Yeah, I think the one thing that's really tough as you're reaching this point in scale is like maybe from 0 to 1, you're just trying to survive and find product market fit. And so you're not really focused on doing things in a way that will solve your pains in 10 years, 5 or 10 years.
Mhm.
I think what I've been doing a lot recently and trying to encourage other people at Column to do is like over document, like just really going 0 to 100 and documenting things. I think it's really important to have organizational knowledge and organizational memory that is actively recalled and actively used. So you're not constantly relitigating decisions. And so, like, a lot of my time working with teams is like building rituals around documentation. Like every Friday, are you writing down the things that you did? Are you logging the changes that you've made in certain processes that you're working on, especially if I'm collaborating with another team? And that's been something I've been really focused on.
Yeah. And on that of optimizing for scale while keeping speed as well, how do you personally think through what's worth optimizing versus leaving scrappy or just navigating that balance?
Yeah. I think the answer here is thinking about how much a process is going to impact revenue or like maybe hours spent on team time. But something that I've observed with some of the processes that I've worked on, does a workflow or process eat at morale? And if it does, maybe it's a good place to start, even though if it's like not obviously something that costs a lot of money or takes up a lot of time, because even if it's like a smaller workflow that really, really frustrates people, I think there's like a hidden cost that has on a given organization.
Yeah. And somewhat relatedly, how do you balance being the company's utility player versus setting structure or boundaries so that you don't end up becoming the catch-all for everything forever?
Yeah. It's a good. I actually asked this question a lot to myself before I even committed to the role, and I think the cop out for me here is that everything I work on, I do need to run by William. Our team is very focused on the highest priority projects for Column, and so he and I have a pretty tight communication loop on what's important and what we need to drive the most value to the business right now. And so in a way, like we work together to create my heavenly mandate, and so it's really easy to focus on one or two projects at a given time. I think ultimately anyone could also do BizOps. I think it's just a job that requires some thinking, a lot of organization. And so what we also try to do at Column is empower a lot of the other teams to develop a more BizOps focused mindset. So we just don't get this like huge backlog of projects that people want the BizOps team to focus on. Like we
Mhm.
really try to encourage it from bottoms up, and it's been working pretty well with a lot of our teams.
How do you think about when to grow the BizOps team or what that looks like? And as that team grows, how to split up the different streams?
Yeah. As the business grows, and the business BizOps team is scaling, I think at some point you'll probably have to specialize with a business like Column. So like I said at the beginning, partner banking or serving fintechs and adjacent customers, that's not going to be the only business that we have. For example, we have a vertical solutions business unit that sells a lot of our banking and payments products direct to property managers. So the business is growing in a lot of different ways. And I think as each business unit becomes its own sizable revenue segment in its own right, you're going to need dedicated BizOps folks to serve those business areas. And so I think there's going to be a lot of specialization over time. I think right now we're young enough and the problems they're somewhat complex, but not like significantly complex such that you would need the team to specialize today.
Yeah. And in terms of more advice for founders, when do you think they should hire their first BizOps person? When is it too early? Do you feel like you were brought in at the right time or you should have been brought in earlier or later, etc.?
Yeah, I think up to a certain scale, a good founder should be able to hold an entire business in their head. It's how you learn the inner machinations of the system that you're building. But I think once the decisions in a business stop being linear and start to look more like an interconnected web between different people, different teams, I think that's when BizOps starts to be pretty essential. I like to think about BizOps as the command and control function for a founder or like a signal repeater, where like a founder has their core principles, their priorities, and a bunch of operating frameworks in their head that they want to push out to the rest of the organization. And once the org becomes too big, it's harder for a single founder to make sure that the fringes of the org can live by those principles. And I think at a very minimum, you need BizOps when you feel like you have less control on the edges of the org, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I would say I was probably brought in at the right time at Column. By the time I joined, I think we were doing something like 100 million in ARR. And so like this is a point where the business is starting to really grow. And like our executive team needs to focus on managing a much bigger business and growing it from 100 to a billion. And that's like a much more complicated problem. And so like I see myself as a way to add leverage for them there.
And what makes a great first hire? How should people find their Charlie?
Yeah. I think it depends on what you want the person to be doing. Because I know BizOps roles are pretty diverse depending on like what the team mandate is. I think for Column specifically, we're trying to build a lot of scalable processes for the bank that last a very long time. And because we're also like right now it's a lean team of me, another person internally soon, and we're also looking to hire one other person. It's still going to be a pretty lean team for the size of the business. And so I would think that you would want this person to be pretty high agency. I think a lot of this work is done with very little oversight because our exec team doesn't have time to like supervise a day in and day out of the BizOps people. And so you want to trust that this person can learn the business, be thoughtful, and then have the confidence to execute in a vacuum. And I think some other traits that are helpful is for people in BizOps to be pretty low ego and be able to fail fast and move on. Because the reality is, I think with any startup, as you start in a BizOps role, like you'll get exposure to so many people, you ask a lot of questions, and you'll start to reach a point where you realize not everyone actually knows everything. And so
Mhm.
you're navigating a lot of uncharted waters. And so you just have to have confidence to just put a stake in the ground, do what you think is right, and adjust quickly if it goes wrong, and not dwell too much on the victories because there's a lot more work cut out for you.
Yeah. Are there any things, whether it's tactical tips or just affirmations that have helped you have that mindset of being able to move quickly and both not dwell on the mistakes or the wins for too long?
Like self-affirmation.
Yeah, that helps.
Yeah, so there's this quote that I pasted in our Notion page that literally says, "Nothing helps. I must help myself or I am finished." It's a bit of a negativistic motivational quote, which is basically saying like it's just you, so figure your shit out. But that's just been my general approach to life, I think, is just like push on, rely on yourself and get it done. So that works for me, but I know it doesn't work for everyone.
Yeah, very rugged individualism, like very American dream.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Nice. If you're up for it, let's move into a rapid fire. So I have a couple of questions and we'll just breeze through them.
Let's do it.
Cool. So if you could swap jobs with anyone at Column for a day, who would it be?
There's two people. So if it also includes swapping brains, I'd probably swap brains with our head of comms,
Mm.
Sean, because comms is a skill set that I'm not super familiar with and requires like a very interesting skill set. And he also just knows a bunch of really weird facts. And so I'd want to swap brains and do that job to fully understand the depth of his knowledge base. And then the other person is probably our general counsel, Meredith. She is the person who this business really needs, right? She understands banking, regulation, risk, law better than anyone else on this planet, probably. And the way that she conveys that to people, to lay people like myself, suggests that that is like a top tier brain. So I want to do a day, spend a day in her life and see how difficult it is and how it feels to navigate that difficulty with like one of the fastest brains I've ever met.
Yeah, nice. Top tier brain Meredith. Shout out.
Yeah.
Hope she listens to the pod. And then what's one cultural thing that you appreciate at Column and hope continues as a tradition?
Yeah, I think culturally, I mean, Column is a bank, right? So we inherently have to be a very serious company, but at the same time, when you go into the office every day and you hang out with everyone, we're also like very unserious when we're together, uh, from a social perspective. And that's probably the part that I love the most. I mean, everyone here is making these niche memes that we send around to each other. We talk about weird shit at lunch. We all hang out outside of work. I think that culture for me personally because I haven't worked at a startup, and so getting to experience this was amazing. And like I always hear from other people that as businesses scale, that obviously has to change when the business grows, but I hope we can retain that for as long as possible.
Yeah, what is a column value or mantra that you I feel like I'm really on this affirmations wave.
Yeah.
Value or mantra that you are constantly thinking about at Column.
Yeah, ours is probably to question everything. I think within banking, there's a lot of red tape. And so it's really easy in banking to just say, well, this is how it's always been done, so we have to do it in this way. And one thing that William really instilled in my head after joining this place is you should question everything internally, externally, and really try to rebuild this bank. I hate saying this, but from first principles. And so question everything is probably the mantra that we use most.
That's a good one. Yeah. And lastly, what emojis, like maybe three emojis, best describe your first year at Column?
Maybe like the hammer emoji,
Okay.
because I feel like I am just like running around hammering stuff.
Mm,
A hot dog emoji and a dog emoji because we have an office dog and his name is Ollie and he's very sweet.
nice. I thought it was because you got that dog in you.
That could also be, yeah, nice double entendre. I like that.
Nice. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Charlie. This was a lot of fun and appreciate you sharing all your wisdom with us.
Thanks, Sarah. It was good to be on.
Awesome. That's it for today's episode of Early Access. Huge thanks to Charlie for sharing what it's like to be the first BizOps hire, building structure from scratch and helping scale a company that's redefining banking infra. If you enjoyed the conversation, follow Early Access wherever you listen, share this episode with a friend, and stay tuned for the next one. Bye.